going back to the nature of the grid, this instantaneous balance between supply and demand, we need different sorts of storage in different places on the grid. In some places, we need storage that can put out, like a sprinter, put out a tremendous amount of energy or absorb a tremendous amount of energy in a very short time. In other places, though, we need seasonal storage. We need a way to take all the solar generation between the spring and the fall, for example, and take the excess and store it for the winter. So it's become seasonal storage or annual storage, and everything in between, whether we're locating storage at the generation site or out in the transmission system or in the distribution system or behind the customer meter. All of those things, lithium ion can't be the one-size-fits-all technology. It can't be the one-size-fits-all set of operating characteristics. We need to find different operating characteristics for different applications across the whole system, soup to nuts. But what that also implies, though, is valuing storage accurately. And I think this is something that in the US we still really struggle with. We struggle with providing enough revenue to a storage facility to match the value it's creating. I think we even struggle to provide enough revenue to match the cost of what they're doing, let alone the value. And thinking about cost as this and value as this, that to me is a big challenge. We've got to look at monetizing frequency regulation. We've got to look at monetizing these seasonal benefits, these peak shaving benefits. And that's something that we really struggle with. We love to do things on a cost basis, and that works, long-term cost of ownership. That works in a fossil-based system, but it's a much tougher fit, much less accurate, much less relevant, I think, in a renewable-based system where it's not so much about the cost of what we're doing as the value of what we're doing.
No, an essential point. You brought me to think about how we farm, right? We farm in the summer, we store in the elevators, right, in the grain elevators, and they pay for the storage in the grain elevators, of course, and we build them and so on, because we understand this cycle of summer, the seasonal cycles in agricultural production. So I think, and this is a total change of model from, let's call it just in time, instantaneous, even for electricity, right? So all this change, it's more than a paradigm shift. It's a couple of paradigm shifts in the industry, and maybe that brings the question of the day, right? What about AI? So first thing to preface, AI is both a consumer and a hope for a better world. But I don't see AI being a way to store the energy in itself. Maybe it can help us find a better way, better business models. So without too much introduction, how do you see AI in the energy management, and how do you see AI in the balance of energy consumption?
I see AI as the key to operating this, again, here be dragons, this unprecedented system in a way that is efficient and safe and effective. The equation that we're trying to solve more and more involves intermittent generation. And as you pointed out earlier, generation that is based on how much does the wind blow, where does it blow, when does it blow, how much does the sun shine, how much cloud cover do we have? All of these very, very complex equations to solve simply to get to renewable energy production, and then assigning transmission to that production, figuring out what needs to go to serve load in the moment versus what can be stored, how to fill and dispatch that storage, each element of storage across the system, but then also looking into the distribution system and in fact behind the meter into the customer. And how do we not just optimize from generation to customer meter, but how do we optimize all the way to the thermostat, all the way to the light switch, all the way to the industrial process and back again? And I'll give you a very simple example of electric vehicles. If we have electric vehicles on the grid and those are vehicle to grid compatible, which is the direction that we're heading, based on the individual behavior of that driver, when can the grid take advantage of that battery? When does the grid need to be charging that battery? At what level does that battery need to be? And how does that get optimized against the fact that the sun only shines during the day, that the wind only blows when it blows, and storage assets across the grid are at various levels of charge and discharge? These are the sorts of equations that are, I think, beyond, well, if not beyond human capability, at least far more efficient, far more effective, and far quicker to solve in an AI environment where it's learning optimal outcomes. Now, how that transition works, I think it's going to be very much pilot by pilot within elements of the system. I hope I'm still alive to see the AI pilot on the entire system. I'm guessing I will be, but it's going to be I think we're going to be very, very cautious in rolling that out simply because, going back to the earlier point, we can't turn off the system to experiment with it. Maybe we can make a digital twin and get ourselves comfortable with the outcomes ahead of time, but we've got to be making these changes in real time we've got to be re-engineering the car as we're here, or completely rebuilding the car as we're driving it. So I see a tremendous opportunity for AI in optimization, and in optimization across variables and outcomes that are frankly dizzying in their complexity, in their variability, in the feedback loops among them. It is truly, we are setting up for ourselves a truly wickedly complex problem in the scientific sense of the term, truly wickedly complex. And to me, the arrival of this wickedly complex problem and the arrival of AI, cometh the hour, cometh the man, that is a perfect combination, or hopefully will be a perfect combination of optimization, just as we really need that optimization for a safe and reliable and cost-effective grid.
No, absolutely. And you touching on system thinking when you talked about tremendously wicked problems, right?
Yep.
I'll bring another element, another part to this conversation. People have a very interesting relationship with automation. For instance, take EVs, take self-driving. I think we are reaching the point where self-driving is statistically safer than human driving. But guess what makes the front page? When a self-driving car hits a pedestrian or an object. Well, we have hundreds and hundreds of accidents across the world, probably thousands every day with dear consequences. So on this theme, I think AI should also be used in a proper and ethical way to communicate the advantages of this system, because I don't believe in perfection, right? Like 100% safe driving, especially driving is so dependent on multiple factors, on education and so on. So I see the role of AI also to expand in dialoguing with humans, if I may say so, on the issues of what's reasonable, what's economically feasible, what is aspirational versus reality. Do you see the same kind of roles?
I do, and I absolutely agree with you on autonomous vehicles. And I think that's actually a really good analogy for operating the power grid, where you've got a seemingly endless number of variables that are each of which is dynamic, each of which is feeding back upon the other. Um, I hadn't thought about this before. I really appreciate the point that this is a version driving a vehicle, especially in a crowded city, is a lot like driving a power grid across an equal number or similar number of extremely complex feedback loops and variables. But I agree with you. I think we humans we're fascinated by automation, but it also scares us. It scares us from an agency perspective. It scares us from a jobs perspective. It scares us from what if the computer gets a mind of its own, sort of perspective, kind of a Terminator, scenario. I think that transition, it's going to be a massive and very, very complex change management exercise. And I think if we have to approach it from that perspective, I think we all have to be change managers as we go through this process and communicate, but also reach people where they are. I don't think this is something that we can necessarily impose, the experts imposing it on the population. This is something where we have to find every way possible to bring people along who are not experts in this field, whether it's autonomous cars or an autonomous power grid. Getting people comfortable with that is going to take a lot longer than we hope it does. It's going to be much more complex than we hope it will be. It will be
It is.
2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe more than 1 step back, over and over and over as we make progress. But I really appreciate the analogy of the electric vehicle or the autonomous vehicle, because that is a very real, very present microcosm of a lot of these emotional and technical challenges that we face.
I may give you a corner case, which I developed some time ago with AI and electrical grid, and it's simple. Let's imagine AI is managing the electrical grid, and it's a major supply problem, like in Texas when the winter came unexpectedly and shut down most of the system. I was there. And then AI has to make a decision, shut down a hospital where people may die, respirators, surgery, and so on, and shut down the AI itself, the management of the system. The engineering solution, as I mentioned, I'm an engineer, will be to shut down the hospital. Because if you shut down the management system, you create more catastrophe, more problems than you ever thought you'll create. However, the human reaction will be, don't touch the hospital.
No, you're
So,
very right.
so these are sort of corner cases where ethics, history, culture, and human reaction is very different than the engineering solution.
Yes, I would agree. There's a very those sorts of questions are I don't think they're really questions that we've ever dealt with as a species. I think these are very new questions. Technology innovation is really compelling ethical innovation, and
Yep.
that is where the rubber really hits the road, so to speak. It's the same thing, with the autonomous vehicles. If you have a choice between hitting, one person and three people, and there are no other choices, what do you do? These sorts of questions are, are becoming very real. And to your point, this is part of the change management exercise, that we actually have these conversations, and we make these questions visible, and we make the conversations around them visible and participatory, because this is the world that we live in now. These are the policy questions that we need to ask and answer.
And Lincoln, I should highlight that in the industries, in the high-tech industries, we have very few people who have a background outside engineering.
Yeah.
So one thing about engineering, we all think the same. I travel around the world and so on. I can take a chalk and a blackboard and draw a few circuits, and people understand or say, "Oh, okay, you built an amplifier."
Yeah.
So we need to, and your background is essential in this kind of communications across different professions, different skill sets, different formations like education and so on. And I know you have a Climate Plus podcast.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us a little bit what brought you to that? How does it run right now? What kind of guests do you have?
Yeah, well, it's thank you. It's called Climate Plus: Purpose and Prosperity in an Unprecedented World, which is a very intentional title. I am all about marrying purpose and prosperity, and I do feel I'm convinced that we are living in an unprecedented time from many perspectives, whether it be climate change, endemic, pollution, younger generations that won't take no or even slow for an answer, political polarization, migration, the list goes on. And so the Climate Plus podcast is built around really two fundamental drivers. One is that through my job and through my network, I end up having conversations like these, which are just so generative and so insightful. And I became very frustrated that they would just disappear into the ether. That without recording them, they would just disappear. And so that was the first motivation. Let's capture these conversations that I'm very privileged to have for the world. The other part of it is that I'm actually working on a book proposal to write a book on this same topic. And so the interviews that I do with experts all across the Climate Plus world, from entrepreneurs to engineers to educators to executives to you name it. It's also a way for me to bring out the examples and the principles that I'm embedding in the book. And so it's a little bit of a dual purpose podcast, but it's been a tremendous amount of fun. And I never get through an episode without my brain expanding somehow. It's just, I'm again, very lucky, very privileged to be able to know these people that I interview, and let alone have a very generative, very insightful conversations with them. So I would encourage everybody to check it out. Just a quick plug: the website is Climate Plus Pod, so Climate PLUSPOD.com, and from there you can get to Spotify, you can get to YouTube, you can get to Buzzsprout, all sorts of other ways to access the podcast.
And how often do you run the podcast? Is it every week or every month, or it's
It's
on demand?
every Thursday morning. So
Oh,
at 5 o'clock, 5 a.m. Pacific time, every Thursday morning. So that's been our current cadence, and I'm even as things get busier and elsewhere in my life, I hope to keep that same cadence, because every conversation is different. Every guest is different. Every expert, level of every sort of expertise is represented. So it's just a constant variety of subject matters and insights and personalities. I think people really get a kick out of it.
And that's parallel maybe to our podcast. We broadcast every Wednesday morning. We pre-record the podcasts, and I found it amazing. I hope my guests learn half of what I learned myself from these dialogues, because it's a total eye opener for the interviewer, as you know. If you reverse our seats today, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And what we took out of that, actually, in the case of AKFI, the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, which is really a sustainability non-profit sustainability association, we started to look deeper on what can be done to make sustainability better. And what we uncover is that we think of sustainability vertically. So each company, we do reports, we have metrics now, especially for environmental impact, carbon footprint, and so on, water consumption. But what we don't look, it's horizontally. And energy production is no secret to mention, for instance, constructions. So there are very long, very complex supply chains which are intertwined, and there is no space right now where they have a discussion. There is no standard to start to say, how do we align the sustainability goals of 5 companies? We use car and tires as an example. So take 5 car companies, 5 tire companies, which have to supply. Each of them has to supply to 5 car companies, right? Large companies have multiple supply chains. How do they align their sustainability goals? Because you look at Tesla and you look at GM and you look at Volkswagen, and you have very different, BYD in China, you have very different sustainability products, very different sustainability goals. And the tire company has to say, okay, so what is my sustainability? What should I take? How can I be helping this industry to be more sustainable? In waste or first thing in the manufacturing, rubber production, and also waste management and so on. So we do this. I don't know if you have come in your discussions across this kind of horizontal challenges with the supply chain in electrical industry.
Only a bit, and that's not because it doesn't exist, but because we haven't quite focused on it yet. Stanford is really at the beginning. I think, like almost everyone in the world, Stanford is really at the beginning of their Scope 3 journey. We are still figuring out subject matter areas. We're still figuring out definitions. We're still figuring out how to measure what we're trying to measure, whether it's revenue based or based on actual emissions or some other derivative. We're really at the beginning of that, and I think we're the whole world, again, it comes back to this image of the edge of the map, here be dragons. I think we're in the same, we figured out Scope 1 and Scope 2 pretty well, but I think Scope 3 is really that unknown territory over the horizon that we're all trying to, get to and understand and make sense of. But to your point, how do we not just make sense of it for ourselves, but how do we make sense of it as a collective? And how do we create standards, and how do we create shared definitions so that we're all not trying to invent the wheel ourselves, but two, so that you get comparability, you get auditability across those verticals. So yeah, it's a scope 3 is it is the mother of all challenges when it comes to emissions. And I really admire the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, we are actually, we usually don't talk in those terms, but we're proposing we try to form a working group where we propose a new standard, which we call the sustainability transaction standard. This transactional model between parts, right? And as you know, and maybe just to add, carbon emissions, scope 3, are 70, 80, 90, 99% of the emissions. So, back to your map model, you have a huge dragon and a little bit of territory in the Northern Europe, let's say, the Scandinavians, and that's all we know about the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The
No,
Vikings, a Vikings map, let's say.
Yeah.
So, no, and thank you. Before we finish today, and I hope to very much to have you back in the podcast soon. Would you like to make some recommendations for students and new grads, as well as people that are in midlife job transition, uh, in terms of what would you recommend to study and how to start in this area of sustainability? A lot of our interns are looking for jobs, for instance, right now in that area, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, I think I think a couple of things. One is that it's so important to understand sustainability. It's so important to understand the standards and the methods and the history and what's worked and what hasn't and how to get things done. But at the same time, I think in the world of work, it's so important to be coming from some specialty that is employable. So coming at it from a managerial background, coming at it, learning how to be a great manager, learning how to be a great accountant, a great lawyer, a great mechanic, a great truck driver, having some sort of marketable skill, but also a framework that allows you to speak and engage in the language of business and engage in business and commerce, I think is so very important. The other piece of advice, I guess this is a two-parter. One, especially if you're still in school, I think there will be two big superpowers in the world of sustainability. I think there already are superpowers. One is project management. I would really strongly encourage everyone that's listening, if you have the opportunity to get trained in project management, that is a superpower when it comes to getting things done in the world of business. But the other is change management. To me, change management is almost the ultimate superpower in this, what I call the climate plus world, in this age of climate change and everything else. What we are undergoing as a species, as Homo sapiens, is maybe the greatest change management exercise since the invention of fire. It really is massive and unprecedented. And those who are skilled in change management will be the ones who I believe are really leading the charge and really getting things done. The do, not just the talk, but the do is going to come from people who have really strong change management skills. So those would be my two pieces of advice. Do something concrete along with your sustainability education, but if you can, include project management and especially change management in in your education process, whether it's a formal education or informal education.
Well, thank you, Lincoln, and I really appreciate it. And I think to be a good change manager, you have to be more than multidisciplinary. We call them transdisciplinary, people that can speak the language of different disciplines, even without going deeper, specialized in one or two, but able to have conversations in all of the elements of change. As we very much, and I want to thank you really for a deep discussion today. Thank you for taking the time to visit with us today. For the audience, make sure to tune in every week for a new episode of Actionable ESG by AKFI Talk Series. You'll gain new perspectives on how to mitigate risks and create value by integrating ESG, sustainability, digital transformation, and as much as we talked today about AI. Again, thank you very much, Lincoln, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you very much.